Welcome to Heart of the Lion. My name is Anthony Hart. Today I want to talk about healing from psychological and emotional trauma. These days, that term, healing, has been co-opted for meaning a lot of different things. And then being conflated with all those things together degrade the idea of healing to say that it's hocus pocus or it doesn't matter. I want to come on here and talk just a little bit about actual healing of psychological and emotional trauma when something has deeply affected you. And I'm not talking about just being offended by the new political ad or the new political slogan. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when the brain and the emotions and the psychological outlook hasn't been fully developed in a child and that trauma happens, or if that trauma happens later on because still that psychological outlook and that emotional capacity hasn't matured enough to where things from the outside world truly affect really deep inside. So this healing that occurs, healing even in your body, healing is a natural process. The body naturally heals over the wound, and the body will find a way. The body is amazing that it finds a way to carry on no matter what. And so, sometimes if you have a torn muscle and you do nothing, you don't reattach it to the bone, it'll heal on its own. The body will find a way to work around that situation and still get the job done. But there's also optimal ways of healing, of actually attaching it to the bone, or even just leaving it so that the muscle can drape down and be close to the bone. It may reattach itself. There's amazing things what the body does. The body knows how to heal itself. And I believe to some degree the psychology and the emotional being and the spiritual being somewhat know how to do that too. There's a natural process of the healing, and there's a saying, time heals all. And I think that's true. It's got a piece of truth in it. Time does heal all. But just because time heals all doesn't mean we don't clean our wounds. Doesn't mean we don't aid the process, because there are people out there that are suffering from childhood trauma that they experienced, and they're on their deathbed and they're still experiencing the stressing effects of that trauma from when they were children. And so time does heal all, but time is much greater than us. Time is infinite. And we are, maybe 100 years on this planet Earth. So just because time does take us in that general direction doesn't mean we can't aid it and help it along and try to make it better a little bit quicker, And it's going to take the time that it takes, and that's going to be different for everyone based on the trauma that they've been through. And for some people, the trauma that they experienced as a child or the trauma that they experienced in some kind of relationship was so challenging for them that the body, the mind, the spirit had to find a way to keep going. But it was so debilitating that they had to just cover it up. It had to just be covered up and maybe not even looked at and held away, stuffed down inside for a long time. And this, I want to talk about this just a little bit, because this is where this whole idea of be a man, stuff it inside, gets kind of lumped in here. And it's sad because, again, there's this conflation of two differing things. If you're totally debilitated by the trauma, the body and the mind, the spirit has to find a way to keep going. And oftentimes it's to shove it down inside. And there is the common trope of be a man, suck it up, and keep going. And I think that is an appropriate, important survival response. Stuff it inside, turn it off, turn away, let it go, keep going. Don't even think about it. Just stop thinking about it, stop talking to it, stop giving it lip service, stop thinking in it, stop feeling about it. Just turn off those emotions, turn off that thinking process about it. And that is a skill, and it is deeply important. That skill is a deeply important part of the reason why human beings have survived for so long, is to be able to put a tourniquet on it and completely cut it off and keep going. The issue is that for a mature, emotionally developed, psychologically developed, strong person who's got a good sense of themselves and a good sense of their place in the world and a healthy outlook on themselves and the world, doing that is not going to cause them issue because they've got a good sense of grounding and stability. And so they can do that, they can survive, and they can keep going, and there's no ill effects from that. And for somebody who doesn't have a good sense of themselves, maybe that sense of self or the sense of the world has been skewed by deep trauma that they experienced, stuffing things down inside and closing them off isn't healthy, because that goes, it almost goes to build the sense of the world around them, even though they've shoved it down. It's still informing their sense of the world and themselves from an undercover position, from a unconscious position, because they weren't healthy enough to take that in and truly cut it off and have something maybe to fall back on, or not fall back on, but something that was underlying, that was more powerful than it. Something that was more powerful than it. And so because they haven't developed that sense of self, sense of the world, sense of spirituality, sense of God, then when they cut it off, it still seeps in to what they're doing and what's informing them about who they are and what their sense of the world is and what their sense of their relationships are in the world. Anyway, this thing can be shoved down, and it's not a bad thing. It is so important to be able to take the stressors of the world and just tune them out and keep going. That is so important. And I think for men get a bad rap for this. It is a good thing. It is imperative as a man that you learn to be able to do this. But if you don't have the stable foundation to stand upon, the stable belief or understanding of spirituality, God, yourself, the world, and the people around you, then this stuffing down can start to seep into your worldview and make you a truly bitter, angry person. And anger gets a bad rap too. There's nothing wrong with anger. Anger is a natural emotion. It's meant to come up and out of you, and to be able to let it go is a natural emotion. There is nothing wrong with anger. But when anger stews and festers and is the only place that you experience, that anger is everything in your life, 24/7, 365 days a year. Anger, 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 anger. Yes, that may be some good fuel for you to get some good things done in the world, but it's not very pleasant. It's not very pleasant. And pleasant is important. I hear all these people, oh, pleasant doesn't matter. They're so full of it. You know, these special forces guys, they do sleep deprivation training. That's crazy. That's hard. It's very hard to deal with sleep deprivation. And they come in it and through it. They go on a mission and they're sleep deprived. They're 10 days in a row, no sleep, whatever it is. And they get back home and the sleep deprivation ends. But if you had sleep deprivation every single day, nonstop, 365 days a year, you were no longer allowed to sleep. For 2 years. No, for 3. No, for 5. For the rest of your life would be miserable. Your life would be horrible. Some of those people that are on some different drugs, one of the worst things about it is actually getting no sleep. It starts to make them crazy. And if you're angry all the time, and I'm not talking about, I got angry from a breakup and I was angry for 2 years straight and I made myself in the gym and I did all these wonderful things. That's fine. I'm talking about angry for decades upon decades upon decades, to the point where you can't enjoy your marriage, to the point where you can't enjoy sex, to the point where you can't enjoy being around children. That kind of anger is hell. And so when people are talking about anger is okay, I'm with them. It is. And stuffing things down is part of the situation, but not 24/7, 365, right? And so if we stuff these things down and we don't have a good sense of self before we learn to do this, if we don't have a good sense of the world and our place in it, and our connection to the spirituality, to God itself, if we don't have a good grounded understanding of this, that stuffing it down can start to make us bitter and angry for a long, long time. And that's not healthy, right? So it is important to be able to vent your anger in the right place at the right time. That doesn't mean everywhere. That doesn't mean just because we say that letting anger out is important, doesn't mean that we get angry at something that happened and we're going to freak out in the middle of school, in the middle of work, in the middle of a concert, whatever it is. We can control that emotion. We can deal with that emotion. We can hold it, and then we can let it out in the appropriate channels when we're around a bunch of friends, when we're around a bunch of family, when we're surrounded by some people that empathize with us, that are compassionate to us. Then that's, or maybe just on our own, by ourselves, in the back corner of the house, in a closet, just letting that emotion go, feeling it, feeling all the tears, feeling all the anger, feeling all the everything about it. And then letting it go. It's important to be able to do these things. So anyways, when we stuff it down inside, this natural healing mechanism happens, and sometimes it can be hard to get at those emotions. So healing is about first being able to get at those emotions. So being able to uncover those emotions and being able to draw up those feelings. Before you can solve a problem, you have to know what the problem is. And the way to find what the problem is to find the symptoms of the problem. And so feeling sad, feeling angry, feeling taken advantage of, these feelings have to be allowed to be felt. And so the important thing is to be able to have a space to have this grief. When you feel those emotions, you begin processing what has happened to you. And so that processing period it takes the time that it takes, and it can't be rushed. And, unfortunately, an event that can occur in a couple seconds, couple of minutes, a couple of days, a couple of months, a couple of years can take much, much more than that to process, especially if it happened when we were in a very vulnerable state. And that processing period, again, it can't be rushed because in the end, for healing to work, the person that is traumatized has to take it on for themselves. It's our own responsibility to take it on for ourselves. And like with physical training, when they talk about going to the gym, one of the critical, most important aspects of training in the gym is you have to consistently go. If you're not consistently, you can have the best program in the world, you can have the best everything in the world. If you don't consistently do it, it'll do nothing for you. So you have to be able to bring yourself back to the table over and over and over and over and over and over again. And only with time in that way will you actually start to make progress. And so part of this healing journey is it's our own responsibility, and we have to be the ones to do it. There's nobody that can do healing work for you. Somebody can give you examples or ideas or help explain different things to you, techniques and ideas to you, but it's up to you to do that. And this brings me to another aspect that I want to talk about, that I want to touch on just a little bit, is that our healing is our own job. It's nobody else's responsibility. And it is unfortunate because sometimes it wasn't our fault. It wasn't our fault that the trauma happened. It wasn't our fault that the thing happened, but it is now our responsibility, no matter what, to fix it. Because how we show up in the world is going to be based on our ability to fix our own issues, to get ourselves in the right state of mind, to fix our relationships, to become a better person in this world, to be a part of the world, to be a part of our relationships in a more healthy way, in a way that is good for us, you know? And so it's our responsibility, and it's no one else's responsibility. And that's incredibly unfair, because we feel like, well, I didn't do anything to have this trauma come to me. But it doesn't matter that it's unfair. The world is unfair. The world is unfortunately unfair. Not everybody's going to be 6 feet tall. Not everybody's going to be 4'5". Not everybody's going to be dark-skinned. Not everybody's going to be light-skinned. It's just, the world is what it is. You know, not everything is going to be a lizard. Not everything is going to be a tree. There's difference in this world, and it's unfair. It's not. It doesn't come out in this fairness. Everything is exactly equal. So we get handed what we get handed in this life through our parents, through the best that they've tried, through the place that we're born in this world, the communities that we're born in this world, through the best that those communities have tried to get themselves to be a good place to be. And we get that experience, we get what we get, and we have to make the best of it. And it is our responsibility to do that. So it's nobody else's responsibility to heal our trauma. It's our responsibility to heal it. And that's a little bit of a hard pill to swallow. It sucks, you know, sometimes people get handed what they get handed, and it is what it is. And if we don't take that responsibility, we end up not healing our trauma and becoming whatever kind of person in this world our trauma leads us and guides us towards. And that's not a fun experience. That's not an enjoyable experience. And so it is imperative, even though maybe the trauma happened to us, that we take this responsibility on full, that we grab onto it and say, it is my responsibility, nobody else's responsibility. We have to take responsibility for our own lives. Our lives are our own, and regardless of what we were handed, we have to take responsibility and ownership to own where we're at and to own the task of making that place a better place, making that place a less traumatized place, a more healed place, a more loving place, a place that is mature, a place that is responsible. We have to take that on. And it's unfair, but it is the case. It's our responsibility to do our own healing work, to make our lives and our situation emotionally, psychologically, and in every other way better. We are placed with that responsibility. That task is placed on our back. And once we get up and accept that responsibility, we can start making a little headway into this. So, uncovering the trauma, feeling the trauma, and understanding that processing of that healing, that processing of that trauma, of those feelings and those emotions that come up, takes the time that it takes. And the reason I say it takes the time that it takes is because we're basically psyching ourselves up to be ready for the next step. And once we've cried enough and felt those tears and those emotions enough and been angry enough for long enough, however long it takes, we get to a place where we say, I gotta be done with these emotions. I can't let this thing that happened to me affect me for the rest of my life. And so it's like a simmering process in a stew. It becomes something that starts to bubble up to the surface once we've experienced these emotions to enough of a degree. We say, I want to experience something different. I don't want to stay stewing in this for the rest of my life. So getting in touch with the feelings, processing the feelings, then leads us to a place where we're finally ready, where we're finally, like in the training example, where we're ready to be consistent with trying to do something different, trying to change where we're coming from, trying to change the feelings that we're having, the emotions, the psychological beliefs that we're having. And when we get to that place, part of this is realizing the truth of the matter, because sometimes the things that we experienced, in some ways, they maybe weren't as bad as what we imagined them to be. In other ways, maybe they were worse than what we imagined them to be. And there are other things that lie in there too, like maybe it was partially our fault for some of these things that happened. And maybe it was partially not our fault that some of these things happen. And going in there and seeing where all those threads truly are, so we can suss it out and we can understand what was our responsibility in the situation and what was the other person's responsibility in our situation. And a lot of times, this is where it gets hard. People don't like this. They want to say, I'm traumatized, it's all their fault, they did all wrong. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it was partially our issues that led us into there. And sometimes it was partially other people's issues that didn't maybe do the trauma, that maybe we don't want to look at that other person. We don't want to see that other person as having affected the situation, because we'd like to put it on the perpetrator because they're an easy target. And understanding where all these little lines lie can lead us to a place, and sometimes it gets muddy in here. Sometimes people don't go at it this systematically, but it eventually ends up with a similar understanding. In this place, we have to learn to understand motives about how the person that traumatized us, or the people that were taking part in the situation but weren't the traumatizers, how their psyches maybe arrived there. And also, if we helped aid and abet that trauma in some way, how our psyche arrived in that place. And understanding, this can't be had when you're still angry and pissed off and torn up by the terror or the sadness or the grief of it. You have to have those processing of that grief and that anger and that frustration and that, oh God, you have to process it enough. And people don't do that. So this is why they don't want to look at this stuff. But when we processed it enough, when we felt the anger and pissed off at them enough, we can come to a place where we start to understand some of their motives, some of our own motives that put us in that place. And when we start to understand this, when we start to understand these things, we can begin to forgive ourselves. We can begin to forgive others. We can stop putting the blame on ourselves for the things we didn't do. And we can forgive ourselves for the things that we did do to aid and abet that. And as we do that, we can start to forgive the others that traumatized us for the things that they did do. We can take the blame off of them for the things they didn't do, and we can forgive them for the things that they did do. And this is an important piece because, and people don't want to get here. They don't want to be in this place. They just want to blame the perpetrator, which is okay, If you're dealing with a situation where somebody's coming after you, you don't have to forgive them on the spot. Oh, I forgive you for chasing me with a knife. No, get out of there. Beat them over the head if you have to. Fight back. Almost cursed. Forget that person. Anyways, forget that person. You got to go after them, Don't be trying to forgive people in the middle of somebody attacking you. That's crazy. That's ludicrous, right? But in hindsight, when that knife attack has been 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You can start some of this process. And this is where this important analogy comes. Holding a grudge against somebody else is like drinking poison and hoping somebody else will get sick. That's crazy. It doesn't work that way. If you drink poison, you get sick. And if you hold hate, anger, and terror, and immense grief inside your heart and never process it, and never deal with it, and never forgive it, and never let it go, then it will affect you in an ill way for the rest of your life, and it won't do anything to the other person. Sorry to say, if you drink poison, psychological and emotional poison, it's not going to affect anybody but you. It's unfair that the trauma happened to you, but it's your responsibility to understand that poisoning yourself isn't going to make it better. It only gets better by you taking responsibility and stop drinking the poison of grudge. That doesn't mean don't protect yourself. Doesn't mean don't defend your family, defend your honor, defend your truth. It just means don't hold the grudge in your heart. You can fight. You can fight fiercely without grudge. You can fight ferociously. You can use anger if you need to, but you don't have to hold a grudge. You don't have to hold hate. And doing so is only going to poison one person. That's you. So we don't have to hold on to that. And so people don't get to this place where they can forgive others because they feel like that hate is the last thing they got. And that's how they're going to try and defend themselves, is just hold on to that hate and that grudge all their life until it totally affects your life and poisons your life. And so we have to be able, well, it takes time. People take their own time too, and then part of holding that grudge and holding that hate is just the people taking their time. They're still processing that trauma. It's hard for them, and there's empathy for that, there's understanding. Doesn't mean you can come over here and do what you want. I'm going to fight back, right? Just like everybody else, you got to defend yourself. But that doesn't mean we can't understand it. We understand, holding on to that grudge and that hate and drinking that poison on your own. That's just somebody still trying to process all their trauma. That's still somebody trying to process all their issues. They're just holding on to it, And it's okay. It's going to take what it takes for them. Maybe it takes 90 years. Maybe on their deathbed they give it up just 0.1%. Well, that's something. It's moving in the right direction. That's good, And time is, infinite. So good for them, But we can take much more responsibility than 0.1% of letting go. We can transform ourselves and make ourselves whole beings again. If I didn't know that, if I didn't have that, I would not be where I'm standing. So I'm so happy to be standing here in front of you, talking to you about these things. When the path I could have gone down was a crazier one. And I'm so happy that I didn't go down that. And it all came from these things that I'm talking to you about. To being able to understand those tendencies, but to be able to feel those emotions, to deal. And then to decide I want something different with my life. And decide to start to understand these things and the roots of where they come from and how and whose part was whose part. And to forgive myself for the things that I did to play a role, and to let myself off the hook for the things that I didn't do, even though I felt like I maybe did them. And then the same for others, to let others off the hook for the things like I felt they did, but they didn't do. And to forgive them for the things they did do, because understanding where that thread of motivation comes from can help us to understand the person. And when we can understand the person, we can have empathy. And when we have empathy to some degree, And maybe empathy is not the right word. Maybe compassion is the right word. But either way, when we can start to feel some of what they felt, or understand where they were coming from to some degree. And there has to be a big level of maturity there. You can't get there if you haven't grieved the tears. If you've gone through immense trauma and somebody really screwed you over in a big way, and then you just say, okay, now jump to understanding their position. That's not going to work. That's the wrong medication for the wrong place. You know, if you have a heart attack and somebody gives you Alzheimer's medication, what the hell is that going to do for you? It's going to do no good. If you get a scrape on your shin and somebody's trying to give you bone surgery, like don't be stupid. That's stupid to do that. Don't be stupid like that. You can't just apply hydrogen peroxide to, you know, whatever the hell you want. Like there's certain things that's not going to be helpful for the situation. You know, everything has a purposeful place, and just because this healing is a gamut and it has multiple tools within it, doesn't mean every tool is for every single job. The tools are for specific jobs along the way, and so you must grieve the emotions and feel the emotions and be ready for this journey. And if you haven't done that work, you can't get to the place where you're understanding where they're coming from and forgiving them. But if you have done that work, if you prepared the playing field, then there is a place where you start to learn to be able to understand where people were coming from and to be able to forgive them. And when you can forgive them, when you can understand where they're coming from, forgive them, when you can understand where you were coming from and forgive yourself for the roles that you played in the creation of that trauma, there can be a big release, there can be a big letting go of these emotions and these traumas in a really profound way. And by this forgiveness is tricky, it's beautiful. When you start to really truly forgive somebody else, there's a restructuring in the neurological patterns of your brain about how you think about that person and how you think about yourself and how you think about the world. The neurological restructuring happens when you start to forgive. When you start to process some of these things, you start to understand. You know, I was talking a lot about empathy, but understanding even, you know, just understanding some of these things starts to restructure the brain. And Stuart McGill, Olympic coach, he talks about strength starts as a thought process. And that thought process triggers the neurons to react in a certain way and then to send a signal down the nervous system, down the nerves, to the muscles to fire the muscles. So you can't have strength without thought. So when we learn to think differently, when we come to an understanding that allows us to open up our perception and to let go of attachment to emotional and psychological things that have happened and to understand them in a different way, we're literally restructuring the neurons of the brain. And so this forgiveness is profound, and this feeling of things is profound. So the next step of this healing is once we've started, and this step can actually be happening all along the way. This final step is, this step can be happening all along the way while we're doing the other processes. And this step is about reprogramming our brain to not be overreactive to the trauma, because that's what happens when people get traumatized. They're so hurt by something that they feel that hurt in all kinds of scenarios that have nothing to do with that hurt. They project that hurt, unfortunately, it's the truth. We project that hurt into lots of different situations that don't have anything to do with that hurt. Or if they have to do with that hurt, they have it to do with it in a very tiny way. But we're so traumatized by that we experience the full onslaught of those emotions from something tiny little that happens in our lives. And that causes us to relive that trauma throughout our days, all our lives, with no let up. And that can make a person crazy. That can make a person destitute. That can make a person perpetually angry to where they ruin their lives. They ruin all the relationships in their lives. And so this next step is really about learning how to be differently in the world. Learning how to create healthier structures and relationships around us. And that is hugely, a big giant part of that is going to be releasing the trauma and letting go. But a whole nother aspect of that is not just releasing the trauma, but learning a new way to be in the world. That can be done all along this process, while you're uncovering the feelings, while you're feeling the feelings, while you're dealing with them, processing them, learning to suss out who was responsible for what roles everybody played, and then learning to understand your own roles in it, and then forgiving all that. Throughout that way, we're going to be teaching ourselves how to be better. And I say this a lot too. A lot of the times, the way we think it ought to be in the world is really God showing us the way we need to learn to be in the world. And so us becoming that and giving ourselves the things we need in order to become that, all along throughout this healing process is medicine for us, is healing for us. And so eventually we have to learn to teach ourselves better ways than what we were taught through our own trauma. And that's the final step here. So I just wanted to speak about this a little bit, to crack into the subject of healing. It feels like some of these spiritual terminology are being taken and co-opted for trivial things when they actually have a really deep, important part of reality in our world. So I wanted to speak up about healing and what healing actually is, and how we can start that process, how we can develop that, how that process develops inside of us. And so thank you so much for tuning into this video. My battery's dying, so I gotta bring this video to an end, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in to Heart of the Lion with Anthony Hart. God bless you all in your healing journey. We'll see you next time.